Hello again, podcast people. This is episode 2 with David Millich. I recorded this about 2 years ago now. I held back on it. I had some issues with the recording. I decided to put it out there anyway now. I edited it a bit. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Thanks again. Without further ado, episode 2. So you're David Millich. You worked as a designer producer for a lot of games, including The Prisoner, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, Heroes of Might and Magic, and Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines. You currently do consulting for Electric Sheep, or as Electric Sheep, and you work at the LA Film School as the production lead faculty, right?
That's right. I'm the lead faculty for the game production program.
Awesome. So my first question is, how did you get there? What inspired you to go into this field to become a designer and producer?
Well, I was always very creative. Growing up, I played a lot of board games, and then eventually started designing my own board games. And by board, I really mean paper. My dad was an engineer, and he'd bring home all these blueprints, and I'd use the back of the blueprints, unfold them, and make my own game boards on them. And I did puppet shows and magic shows, and built haunted houses in my garage, and I made Super 8 home movies, and wrote stories and drew pictures. And so I basically anything creative that I could think of, I would do. But in terms of turning that into a career, when it was time for me to enter college, I was kind of wrestling between three options. I either wanted to be a filmmaker, a writer, or an artist. And I really couldn't decide which one. So I decided to just be a undeclared major when I entered college, and took a lot of different classes. And one of the classes I took to fulfill my general education requirements was a introduction to computing class. And this was back before there were personal computers. It was we used the university computer, either using punch cards for the larger computer, or there was a PDP-11 mini computer that had shared terminals that we'd work on in the computer lab. And one day when I was sitting in the computer lab waiting to use the printer to print out my homework assignment, I started typing out a Star Trek game just because I was bored. So I was working on it, and it was one of those games where you have the sector around you laid out in a grid, and you had to figure out the right coordinates. So you fire your photon torpedoes in the right direction to destroy the Klingons. And as I was creating this, it occurred to me that I was kind of telling a story in which the player was the hero of the story. And by the different commands they could take, where they move and where they shoot, they were effectively making choices about what they wanted to do in the story. So I suddenly got very excited by the idea of interactive storytelling. And it occurred to me that a computer could be used as a creative medium, just as a film camera or an easel or a typewriter could be. So I immediately went to the administration department, and changed my major to computer science. So I started taking a bunch of computer classes, and one of those classes was a class in COBOL programming. And COBOL was a computer language used by the government and by businesses. At the time, it stood for Common Business-Oriented Language. But what I was doing with it, I was using the university computer to print out pictures of the Starship Enterprise and generate poetry. And then my COBOL professor, caught me and called me to the office. Said, he handed out one of the sheets. I see what you're doing, and I want to offer you a job. Oh, wow. Turned out he and a couple of the other university professors that were friends of his jointly owned a computer store. I think it was the second computer store ever to open up in Los Angeles. and they sold the brand new Apple II computer. So he hired me to be a clerk in that store, and my job was to make basically handle the mail order end of their business, because they produce a catalog, selling software. Because at that time there weren't very many software publishers out there. Most people, they buy a computer and wouldn't know what to do with it, so they'd start making their own software. It could be database software, checkbook software, or I was pleased to discover games. So a lot of the customers that buy the computers from the store, they'd come back with some game or some other software they made and make a deal with the store to sell it to their mail order catalog. And so I was responsible for duplicating the discs and fulfilling the mail orders. And then one of the customers, who actually had started up a small publishing business, asked me if I would write some games for him. And yeah, sure, of course. So the very first game I made was a sequel, actually, to a text science fiction role-playing game the company had already produced. So I made some expansion modules for that. And then I made my own game. It was an economic simulation based upon the oil crisis that was going on at the time. So this was like around 1979. And I made a couple other games. And the owner of the company was called Eduware, which stood for Educational Software, although it also made games. They hired me when I graduated to be a game designer and programmer. So that's how I got my job in the industry. But very soon after that, the company was only 4 people when I joined them, and we operated out of the owner's apartment. So there were 4 of us. There were 3 of us that worked in the kitchen living room area, actually making the software, and our salesman was in the bedroom making all the sales calls. And after about 6 months, we were successful enough, we moved into a real office, and we just started growing from there. And I think eventually we got up to around 50 people in our company. And they put me into a management position because we brought on more programmers to help out. And my boss thought I'd be more useful, more productive if instead of programming the games myself, I would design the games and supervise the programmers that actually implemented them. So I became more of a producer role, even though at the time we weren't called producers back then. It wasn't until Trip Hawkins, when he started up Electronic Arts around 1982, that he came up with the idea of game producers that kind of mirrored music producers. But I essentially had to have that role because we also had outside developers that we'd work with, and I advised them on developing their games. And just went from there, and pretty soon I spent most of my career being either a producer, which is someone who works at a publisher and works with outside developers, or as a director, which is someone who leads a internal development team themselves. So that's what I spent about another 30 years, the other 30 years of my career doing.
Awesome. And when did you start Electric Sheep? Is that just an extension of that?
Electric Sheep is basically what I call my consulting services. And during the times that I wasn't engaged as a full-time employee, I'd be approached with short-term contracts. So I just called my business Electric Sheep. That was about 5 years ago that I started that.
Okay, cool. You also designed a Boy Scouts badge for game design. What's the history of that? What led you to do that?
Well, something that I was approached about by Mike Zaida, who leads up USC's Game Pipe Lab, which is a master's degree program in game programming. He and I had talked previously about putting together a company to publish games made by his students. Well, we couldn't get the financing for it. And so I wound up being a mentor for some of his students. And when the Boy Scouts started thinking about doing a game design merit badge, they were collecting people in the industry who had experience in game design, to professional experience to help out with it. It went to Mike Zaida first, but he was too busy, and he knew my sons were in the Boy Scouts, so he recommended me. So then the Boy Scouts came to me and asked me to be part of their team. And so it was a team of quite a number of people, and we were each given out their responsibilities. And my responsibility was to write up the chapters on game prototyping and game play testing for the manual that goes with the merit badge. And so I wrote those chapters, and when we actually released the merit badge, I'm now a merit badge counselor for it. So I help our local Boy Scout school district and a neighboring school Boy Scout district in teaching scouts how to obtain their merit badge in game design.
That's really cool. I wish I had that as a kid. It just seems like it would be a fun thing to do. Going more into game design and I guess even production, what's your approach to a new game? How do you, when you're put into that role of a producer or designer, director, if it's a brand new game, you're just put into the game, how do you approach that? What kind of work goes into that?
Well, most people would be surprised to hear this, but probably 99% of all games are not the ideas of the game designer responsible for it. Usually they're ideas that are given to you, either because you're working on a sequel, or you're working on a remake, or you're working for a client that wants to have a game made. It might be a publisher, or it might be some company that wants to create a game to promote one of their other products, like Mattel, the toy company that goes out and has games made based upon their toys. So they will come with the idea, or it could be the boss of the company, and they'll come to you and say, "All right, we want to make a game based upon this premise, or set in this world, or we got a deal to make a game based upon this particular movie." So the first thing is to kind of hammer out what the basic premise of the game is and what the player experience is going to be like. In playing this game, what do we want to have the player immersed in? What do we want to have them, what you want to be fast-paced, slow-paced? Is it more of a thinking game? Is it more of a dexterity game? And what are the best game mechanics to achieve that? What type of player is it for? Are we making a casual game that everyone can play, all ages, all types, all experience levels? Or are we going after a hardcore gamer who is an expert at playing games in one particular genre? And that kind of develops from there. We'll go into a series of usually brainstorming sessions, often with a core team of people. So it may be your lead designer, lead programmer, lead artist, maybe a couple other people, and just starting developing ideas, maybe developing that basic premise more, maybe figuring out what type of characters that go in the game, what kind of technology we need to develop. And it just kind of gets built up piece by piece by piece. And this is the pre-production phase of game development, the planning phase. And as we develop a game, we may be actually playtesting it very early on. Could be that we'll create a paper version of the game before committing programming resources to it, just to make sure that the basic gameplay makes sense, and to figure out what sort of things we do need to figure out. And then from there on, making a small prototype of the game. And it could be either a vertical prototype, in which you have essentially the entire game mapped out from beginning to end, but you're using very rudimentary graphics and sounds and not much of a story, but kind of taking the player from one end of the game to another. Or it could be a vertical prototype where we create maybe 15 minutes of gameplay, where the graphics are refined and the sound's in and the user interface is all nicely detailed out, kind of give a impression of what the ultimate game is the final version of the game is going to look like. So you can, again, do either vertical or horizontal prototype. Figure out exactly what we want this game to be. And then it goes on from there to even more planning, ready full game design document, which describes all the rules for the game, all the elements of the game, all the attributes of those elements, how do they all interact with each other. And then technical design document that describes how we're actually going to make the game, the kind of tools we need, what systems we're going to work on, what the biggest technical challenges we're going to have in the game, how we're going to solve them. What can we do otherwise if we can't figure out how to solve these challenges? Is there another route we can take? And then an art Bible describing the color palette we're using, basic art style, listing all the different elements we need to create from the game. And from all those elements, we'll create a schedule and a task list for developing the game. So once all that pre-production planning is done, then we move into the production phase, where we already know what the basic game is. Now it's iterating on it, creating all the different levels for the game and everything required to support those levels. All the quests, all the missions, and all that. And that requires bringing on more people, more programmers, more artists, writers, level designers, and we just start churning out stuff. Still play testing as we go, but churning stuff out. And that's the longest phase of development. That's probably about 2/3 of development is the production phase. And then once it all comes together, then you enter the post-production phase, where you begin testing it with a outside group of quality assurance testers who've never seen the game before. You give it to them, and they have two tasks. One is to verify that we implemented everything that we expected to implement. And two, the stuff we did implement, did it work properly? So we give them the build with that. We give them essentially a checklist of all the stuff they have to check out. And then they play through the game. They find problems, report the problems back to us. We fix those problems, hopefully, give them a new build to play. And then it happens all over again, over and over and over until the game's good enough to ship. So that's kind of the overall process of game development.
Okay. So in this while you're doing all this, who sits back and, or I guess what I really want, what to you makes a great game? At what point what differentiates a great game versus just a mediocre game in what you're doing?
A couple of things can differentiate it. Most of all, is it engaging? Does it hold people's interest as they play? And that involves balancing two things. One is the difficulty of the game. Is the game sufficiently challenging that it holds people's interest, but not so difficult that it becomes frustrating? And the tricky thing is that different players have different skill levels. And so what may be easy for some may be very difficult for others. So that's why at the very start, you need to figure out what player are you making this game for? Is it someone who's very skilled or not very skilled? And what's your range of acceptability between the low range player, the low skill player, and the high skill player? And you may be able to mitigate that a little bit if it's kind of a broad range by having different difficulty levels within the game. So as the game progresses, player gets better and better playing that game. So you got to make sure that the challenges of the game get more difficult so that they match the player's skill level. So it's making sure the difficulty is right, but there's also the complexity of the game. And the complexity has to do with how many rules the player has to learn to be successful at the game. And as they're playing the game, how much information do they have to process, both in terms of the number of elements game elements they have to be aware of, and how quickly does the status of the game change? And to what degree is information within the game hidden? Is it hidden because it's not revealed by the game system to the player, or are there are multiple players playing the game who have information about their aspect of the game state, but not other players' aspect about the game state? So you want to make sure that you balance out the complexity so that the player doesn't get overwhelmed with the amount of information they have to process as they're learning the game. And then once they learn all the rules of the game, do they feel they have enough information to make intelligent choices that affect the outcome of the game? So it's all about balancing that complexity and the difficulty at the different stages of the game. And of course, there are the more aesthetic stuff like story and the art and the audio. Is all that stuff compelling enough that when you make the game trailer and the game advertising, you get people interested enough in the game that they actually want to play it, sample it, and then does it look state of the art enough that it compares favorably to other games out there? Does it look like it is a good quality game? So you're balancing both gameplay as well as the aesthetic components of the game. And can you do all that within the budget and the time frame that you're given to make the game?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because you're pitting. It's a weird thing with, at least with single player games, you're pitting the player against the system. So it's a really heavy balancing act for designers and developers to figure out, what you want to experience, the player to experience, and when.
Yeah.
So it's a hefty job. I can see that. So if I was a new student, what's your first day kind of pitch, or just kind of a first day tips that you give to new students at LA Film School?
Well, in my very first lecture, I mostly let them know what they're getting into, because I try to clear up some of the myths about game development. And probably the biggest one is that game development is a real job for adults. It's not just playing games all day. It's not goofing off. It's actual work. And in fact, it is very difficult work and can at times be very stressful. And yeah, it can be, it's also fun at times. But I kind of equate it to kind of like the process of giving birth to a child. The conception stage, that's a lot of fun. It's exciting. But then as the baby develops and you start getting more and more serious about it, you got to start planning things out. Where are you going to how are you you got to buy the crib, and are you going to breastfeed or bottle feed? Are you going to, what colors do you have? What clothes do you have? Do you have enough room? How are you going to handle a daycare if both of you are working? And all that sort of thing. And then as it gets very, very close to giving birth, it gets much more uncomfortable. The reality really gets in. It starts to get stressful. Birth itself is extremely painful. But then once it's released, there you have there you can enjoy having a kid, enjoy your creation, except for the diaper changing, which is making patches in the game. So it's a lot of fun at the beginning, but then it gets very serious, and it's very serious. So hard work, a lot of good decision making, and getting stressful as the due date approaches. So I let them know about the realities. Also let them know that actually getting a job in the game, there is a lot of, it's like wanting to be a professional athlete or a rock star or a fine artist that actually gets displayed in galleries. There are a lot more people that want to do this job than there are jobs available. And not only that, even when you are working in the game industry, it's a very hit-driven business. And companies go through financial highs and lows. And when they are at financial lows, they lay people off. And so you frequently get laid off within the game industry. The International Game Developers Association did a survey a couple of years ago and found that the average game developer has held 4 jobs within a 5-year period. So it means constantly looking for work, and then maybe once you do find work, and maybe unexpectedly getting laid off. because either the game's over. Well, you may know ahead of time they're going to get laid off because sometimes people are brought on for the production phase and then let go after the production phase is over, or they're let go after the game is completed, regardless of how successful it turns out. But then if it isn't successful, then it's almost certainly you're going to get laid off. So it's there's a lot of stress and uncertainty in working in the game industry. So I try to let them know all that before they get into it. There's the illusion, there's the glamour of working in games, and then the reality in that it's a real job with a lot of frankly hardships associated with it. And yeah, it can be fun, and sometimes it can be lucrative, but it's for most people it's kind of a middle class job.
Mm-hmm. Have you had anybody ever just quit, like just right up and after you said that? Okay, I'm out.
Never at the lecture. Never at the lecture. I've had them. I've had students leave the program because they realized game development wasn't for them. In fact, just the last class I taught, one of my students failed to show up for the last day of class. And he sent me an email saying that he found his dream job. I'm not sure what it was, but he said he found his dream job and that he was going to leave the program to do it, and maybe he'll come back and maybe he won't. So,
wow.
So it happens.
So my next question was about current gaming trends, but I saw that you went to E3. I also attended.
Yeah.
You hung out a lot in the IndieCade, which I did too, because it was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's anything missing from, mainstream AAA gaming that maybe we had in the past that we could get back? Because you've been working in the industry a long time. You actually did kind of like an indie thing at first too.
Yeah.
So is there anything that we're missing today in mainstream gaming that we could get back from the indie side?
Innovation. Innovation. There's not a lot of innovation in the game industry. I mean, you go and you take a look at what's mainly being promoted out there. You hear if you're watching the big press conferences. All right, coming up with a new version of Battlefield and another Far Cry game, and there's going to be another version, the next Resident Evil game, the next this, the next that. It's all basically just new versions of the same old thing. And I don't get real excited by what a lot of the big publishers produce. And the reason for that is that games are so expensive to make these games. I think the average game budget is $60 million. And there's no guarantee that it will earn back that money. So publishers can't afford to take risks on new properties, on new ideas, new types of gameplay. They want something that's reliable. They want something they know there's an established audience out there for, that people will want to buy as soon as they hear the title. So they're afraid to take risks because they can't afford it, because they'll lose too much money if the game doesn't do well. And it used to be when I started in the industry, because it didn't cost much to make a game, it didn't take long to make a game. I could churn out a game. I think the quickest I ever made a game was 3 days. I was called by my publisher. I was told that that weekend they were going to appear at the West Coast Computer Fair and needed a new game to promote. So they asked me to whip up a game, and I made one in 3 days. So that was easy back then, and you could afford to be innovative. Nowadays you can't. So you see all the innovation in more on the indie side. And sometimes innovation pays off. Sometimes, as we see in something like No Man's Sky, it doesn't. So that's where you got to look for the innovation. And that's why when I go to E3, I just get drawn to the IndieCade booth. Because I'm not, usually I only have 1 day to spend at E3, and I'm not going to spend 5 hours standing in line to see a demo or even do hands-on for a game where I can watch the trailer on YouTube. It's just not a good use of my time. But I go to the IndieCade booth, which usually isn't very, very crowded, and I can find all these really unique, interesting games. And it could be high-tech stuff that uses VR, or low-tech stuff that's like board games or other physical games. And that's where I find the really cool stuff, the most fun stuff. And I'll walk by and I'll see, Battlefield 2, that looks really cool. I like Star Wars, but you got to stand in line for 4 hours to play it. So not a good use of time of my time at the show.
I think I spent about an hour playing that Vampire the Masquerade text game, which was really awesome.
Yes, that wasn't that. I was very pleased having worked on the Activision game about how long ago was that? It was like 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite games.
That was great. So that's a game based upon the World of Darkness, where you play on your cell phone, and it's essentially you're role playing, sending text messages to your character, and not just text messages. You can also send images as well. So that was a lot of fun. I was very happy to see that.
My next question, are you working on anything right now? Anything big other than just teaching, or are you just mainly focused on teaching right now?
I'm not doing any contract work at the moment. A while back, I was working on gamifying a shopping site that I don't think has been released yet, so I can't talk about it. Trying ways to make it more engaging, the shopping experience using game mechanics. And then I was also working on I was hired to work on a dating website that was hoping to attract gamers to it. That was really cool. And I was going to produce some of the games for it, but they didn't get their funding, so that only lasted a couple of months. So right now I don't have any contract work going, but I never know. Any moment email could arrive in my mailbox asking me to talk about developing something.
What recent games have you enjoyed, if any? Like anything big that you've really liked that you want to talk about?
Well, I spend most of my time kind of working on my students' games. I try to pay attention to what's happening in the industry. So I played Overwatch and Uncharted 4 a little bit, and those are all big games. Everyone knows how popular they are, and played Pokemon Go because that was innovative. Just the whole augmented reality experience until after a while I discovered there wasn't much gameplay behind it. So that only held my interest for a couple of weeks. Not really. It's mostly me sampling stuff when I go to IndieCade or E3 or the Game Developers Conference. That's where I mostly try out games, and I watch game trailers or watch gameplay throughs on Twitch and YouTube. Just got to kind of stay abreast of what's happening out there. But I'm looking forward to some stuff that's coming out. I think Ubisoft's Skull and Bones games looks really cool. That one is a tactical action adventure, so it kind of combines two of my favorite genres: strategy games and adventure games, and it involves pirates, which I've always liked pirate themed games, all the way from Sid Meier's Pirates up to Assassin's Creed 4. So I'm really looking forward to when it comes out.
There's not enough pirate games.
No, there can never be enough pirate games.
No.
So I'm looking forward to that one. Awesome. Every once in a while I'll discover some little indie game that I'll play with and enjoy. But most of my day is occupied playing my students' games. So that's what keeps me busy most of the time.
Cool. This is my last question. If I had to play any game from history or watch any movie or anything or experience just one thing related to games and game development, what would it be?
Super Mario Brothers. That was such a brilliant game when it came out. It certainly informed all the platformers that went on after it. I mean, it's simple, but back then it invented a lot of stuff. I'll tell you another game that if you want to go back in history and re-experience some game innovations, Pac-Man. The reason why Pac-Man had a number of different innovations to it, it had the first use of cutscenes because of the little interludes that happened between the different levels. It was actually the very first video game mascot in terms of the Pac-Man character. Now, you know what the Pac-Man character was based on?
I think a hockey puck or something. I'm not sure.
That's a good guess, but no. It's a pizza with a slice taken out. That's the original idea behind it. And combined with eating the pills, it was all about eating. And I remember at the time, my girlfriend at the time, her favorite game of all time was Ms. Pac-Man because she loved to eat. I mean, she had a good figure. She ate healthy. But she loved eating, so therefore she loved playing with Pac-Man. And it was the very first use of power-ups. So,
oh yeah, because you can pill and eat the ghosts.
Right. So I like, I sometimes revisit the old games, do some retro gaming, just to appreciate the innovations that were in them, things in the games that had never been seen before.
Yeah, I like those old games mostly because they're kind of an innovation by necessity. They didn't have a lot to work with, so they had to do something really compelling to make you play, which is really exciting. I think that's something we're missing too. Another
interesting experience, and you probably experienced this with the Vampire Masquerade game, is going back and playing some of the old text adventures. Because that way you kind of experience the story without the distraction of visual. And I mean, the Classic Cave Adventure and Resort games, but there were a number of different text adventures that came out at the time. So those were always cool.
Right.
And then I want to play one of the most unusual games of all time. Play my game, The Prisoner. It's available through an Apple emulator somewhere online. You can play it. The Prisoner or Prisoner 2.
Yeah, I checked out Prisoner 2 on the Internet Archive, and it was kind of intense.
It's an unusual game. I don't think there's been anything like it since. So I encourage you to try that one out if you don't mind old-style text-based games.
Not at all. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Let me close this out and hold on one sec. Hey, this is Anthony again. Just wanted to do a quick sign off and say thank you again for listening. If there's any guests you'd like to hear from, go ahead and shoot me a line on Twitter. There should be a link in the description. If not, then I'll fix that. Thanks again, and have fun, guys.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.